The Battles of the Revolutionary War. Before we start to look at the actual battles, it's important to know how the colonies felt before the revolution started. Benjamin Franklin created this political cartoon to help rally the colonists, to get them together to fight Great Britain. And if we look at it, we can see that it's a snake, seemingly cut into pieces. But can you guess what these are? If you guessed that these symbolized the colonies, you were correct. New England, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. You can see that each part of the snake represents a colony. Now, this says join or die. So what do we know about snakes? We know that if you take a snake and cut him into pieces, he's not very dangerous. And at this point, the colonies were kind of like separate pieces. They didn't talk to each other a lot, and we know that the New England, middle, and southern colonies were different. So they're kind of separated. And Franklin says, you better join together or you're going to die. And he understood that the colonies needed to join together in order to battle the British. And we know that if you take a whole snake, he's very, very dangerous, especially if he's venomous, but even if he's a constrictor. So what Franklin is saying here is if we join together, then we can be like a snake, very dangerous, very deadly. And that was the purpose of this cartoon before any of the battles started. So hopefully we know at this point that the battles at Lexington and Concord were the first battles of the Revolutionary War. They took place in Massachusetts. And at Concord, the British were forced to retreat back to Boston. So hopefully we know that here's Boston. The British got word that the colonists were storing weapons in Concord, Massachusetts. So the British started to march, and at Lexington they were intercepted by the colonists. There was a battle. The colonists lost. The British continued on to Concord, where there was another battle at the Old North Bridge. And this time the colonists defeated the British and forced them to retreat all the way back to Boston. The next important battle was at Bunker Hill in 1775. Actually, it took place at Breed's Hill overlooking Boston, but Bunker Hill was very close by, and somehow it got the name Bunker Hill. 2,400 British against 1,600 colonial militia. Militiamen, if you remember, are soldiers that have not been trained in the army. They're just kind of regular people that went to fight alongside the actual army of the colonies. The colonial commander orders, don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes. Can you guess why he might have said this? Well, we know that to see the whites of someone's eyes, they have to be pretty close to you. And the colonial commander wanted the soldiers to wait until the British were close enough so that if the colonists shot at them, they had a pretty good chance of hitting what they were shooting at. And if the British were too far away, the chances of a colonist actually hitting one of the British was pretty slim. The Patriots lose at Bunker Hill, but they show the British that they're tough enough to take on the Redcoats. The next important battle was the Battle of Trenton in 1776. It took place in New Jersey, Christmas night, 1776. Washington and 2,400 soldiers sneak across the Delaware under cover of night. And they plan a surprise on the sleeping Hessians. The Hessians were German mercenaries. A mercenary is someone who fights for a country only for pay. Germans didn't really care if the British won or if the colonists won. They just cared about getting paid. And that's called being a mercenary. And the Hessians were mercenaries. They had been up all night, probably having a good time. And many of them were probably passed out. They had fallen asleep. and Washington decided this would be a good time to attack. It was a very smart move. Huge victory for the Patriots. Washington takes over 900 Hessian prisoners. And this revitalizes the American Revolution. In other words, when people heard about this victory, they got charged up, they got fired up, and thought to themselves, maybe we can actually win this. Next important battle was at Saratoga in 1777. New York. This was the turning point of the war in favor of the Patriots. This is an important fact you're going to want to remember. This was when things started to go the way of the Patriots in favor of, hey, maybe these colonists can actually win. And this is where the war kind of turned in favor of the Patriots. Colonists cut down trees and dammed rivers. You could see that the British probably wanted to sail their ships up to Saratoga so they had their powerful navy engaged in the battle. But the colonists cut down trees and dammed the rivers so the ships couldn't get through. The colonial militia conducted sneak attacks on British patrols. And because of this victory, very important, the Patriots gained the support of France and Spain. France and Spain had been watching the revolution closely from across the sea, and they were thinking about getting involved, but France and Spain didn't want to back the colonists if they didn't think the colonists had a good chance of winning. And because of this victory, France and Spain saw that, hey, maybe the colonists can win this, and we're going to support them with our military. Very important. Valley Forge, 1777, upstate Pennsylvania. The Army lacked protection and supplies. What kind of protection? Well, not guns, but basic clothing, shoes, socks, shirts, coats, hats. They lacked protection against the elements. They couldn't protect themselves against the bitter, bitter cold and wind. And they also lacked supplies. 1,200 men fought the brutal winter of 1777 to 1778. They were low on supplies, low on food, shelter. Some soldiers didn't even have shirts. 2,000 men died of disease and malnutrition. But after the winter at Valley Forge, the soldiers were trained and toughened. They went in, maybe not as tough, maybe not as ready to fight as they could have been, but after this tough, difficult winter, these soldiers came out ready to fight. They were tough. They were soldiers. There were some battles at sea during the American Revolution. Benjamin Franklin persuades Louis XVI, who was the King of France, to help the revolution by sending his navy. Patriots attacked British supply lines in the Bahamas, which is south of the United States, so the British couldn't supply their soldiers. Sailor and pirate John Paul Jones exclaimed, "I have not yet begun to fight." The Continental Navy used fewer than 100 ships, yet defeated over 200 British ships. There was vicious fighting in the southern colonies during the Revolution. Patriots versus Loyalists and the British. At this point, the British realized we might not win this, and they got desperate. The fighting in the southern colonies was very brutal. The British destroy and kill everything in their path. Southern patriots switched to hit-and-run tactics known as guerrilla warfare. So the patriots would sneak up on the British, jump out, do as much damage as they could, and then run and hide. Hit and run. That's called guerrilla warfare. The British became frustrated by this kind of battle and not being able to counter this type of warfare. The last battle of the Revolution was at Yorktown in Virginia in 1781, the final battle of the Revolutionary War. General Cornwallis, who led the British troops, moved 7,200 men to Yorktown, Virginia. Washington orders the French Lafayette who was in command of the French forces in the U.S. Washington ordered him to block Cornwallis in by land while he commanded 16,000 colonial soldiers. And the French fleet arrived to block British escape by sea. So now the British forces were trapped between the French fleet in the water and Washington and French soldiers on land, and the British couldn't go anywhere. Together, the French and the Americans wear down the British. And on October 19th, General Cornwallis, commander of the British forces, surrenders, and the Americans win. This is a famous painting of General Cornwallis surrendering to George Washington at Yorktown. And this was the final battle of the Revolution, and when the United States formally achieved independence from Great Britain. Please see me with any questions you may have about this video. I will help you any way I can. If you need clarification on any of the information, please do not hesitate to shoot me an email, see me in homeroom, or ask me in class.